Welcome to the big American slugfest where the Chevrolet Trailblazer takes on the Ford Endeavour. Now both of these are full-size 7-seater SUVs. They're running diesel engines with 6-speed automatic transmissions and two-wheel drive powertrains. But beyond that, let's just see what each of these SUVs has to offer to the Indian consumer. On the outside, the Trailblazer is a fairly imposing and of course intimidating SUV to look at as well. Driving this SUV in urban areas, in traffic, well, it can easily intimidate others, but at the same time it can be quite intimidating for the driver himself. This SUV is nearly 5 meters long, stands well above 6 feet in height and is nearly 2.2 meters in width. So it's a huge footprint that it occupies, and that makes it a little difficult, a little tricky to drive in urban areas. While the Trailblazer may be very imposing on the outside, it's not one of the most handsome SUVs that you would find on the road. There are far better looking SUVs. The Trailblazer looks stuck back in time, almost a decade ago. The design's a little old, the design's a little dated, and while the imposing looks work, well, the styling by itself isn't very modern. The same goes for the interior. This is a well-built cabin. Everything's fit into place fantastically well. And I think this is one of those SUVs that will also stand the test of time very well indeed. But the design of this dashboard, well, it looks a bit outdated. The Endeavour may not be as imposing to look at as the Trailblazer, but make no mistake, the Endeavour is almost as large as the Trailblazer is. It's almost 5 meters in length, nearly 2 meters in width. However, height, well, is a little shorter than the Trailblazer. Ground clearance too, the Endeavour's 225 mm does not compare to the 253 mm that the Trailblazer has to offer. The large footprint that the Endeavour carries also means it's got a lot of interior space to offer to consumers. Of course, interior space is not as large compared to the Trailblazer. Nonetheless, you still get enough room for 3 rows of passengers. The third row is a bit cramped, and of course, headroom at the rear is well, a little less than what you get in the Trailblazer. The interiors of the Endeavour are also very stylish, very contemporary. It's got this nice large display panel, touchscreen infotainment system, though I'm not entirely in favor of touchscreens. Yet, well, it's a good system to look at. It's an easy system to operate. Even the climate control unit just below that, well, it's got these soft touch buttons, very appealing, very stylish the way it's been presented. A 2.8-litre 4-cylinder turbocharged diesel engine powers the Trailblazer. Now this turbocharger is a variable geometry turbocharger, and when it spools, it helps the engine develop 200 PS of max power, but an enormous 500 Newton meters of max torque. There isn't any SUV in this class or even several classes above that can generate as much torque as the Trailblazer does. Now that torque should necessarily mean that this is a very aggressive, very punchy engine, that the responses should be very quick. However, driving it in urban areas, the Trailblazer feels a bit sluggish, and that's because of a very sluggish gearbox. I do wish the transmission on the Trailblazer was much quicker, would have made driving this SUV so much more fun. Nonetheless, the Trailblazer is easily capable of doing 100 km per hour in 9.8 seconds. That is what we recorded on our test runs. The Trailblazer is a bit of an old school SUV. It's still a body-on-frame chassis with independent suspension in the front and double wishbones on the rear. But ride quality, well, it's a mixed bag. Over some of the bumps, the Trailblazer feels, well, comfortable, feels compliant, has got no issues whatsoever. And in some of the bumps, it crashes into violently. There's also a fair amount of body roll, and you get a sense of this body roll every time you start driving the Trailblazer out on the roads. Given the condition of most Indian roads, even in urban areas, the slightest bit of undulation translates into a lot of wallowing. So that makes the Trailblazer a very exhausting vehicle to drive. Another big advantage the Trailblazer has to offer its consumers is the ground clearance that it has got. 253 mm of ground clearance. That's an enormous amount of ground clearance. So not only are you sitting fairly high up, you can comfortably drive almost anything, and you get this fantastic view from every corner. It's got very narrow A-pillars for an SUV this size, so visibility is brilliant all around. clear sight lines at the rear, clear sight lines at the front, clear sight lines at the sides, and the enormous wing mirrors. Well, they give you a clear idea of what's coming up behind you. The Trailblazer has an enormous feature list. There are lots of goodies on offer in this SUV, and all of that is available at just rupees 27 lakh. And keep in mind that this is for just one variant. Yep, only one variant of the Trailblazer is available in India. That's the two-wheel drive 6-speed automatic LTZ variant. This is a good value for money package overall. So I've just driven the Trailblazer. Now let's see what the Endeavour is like. The first thing that comes to mind when you step into the Endeavour and begin driving this SUV is that it's just so much easier, so much simpler to drive than the Trailblazer. It almost feels car-like in its appeal. And that is a huge draw for Ford. Compared to the previous generation Endeavour, this SUV is miles ahead of that and, well, several miles ahead of the Trailblazer as well. Ford India offers two engine options, two diesel engine options for the Endeavour in India. One of them is the 2.2-litre diesel, the other is a 3.2-litre diesel. Both these engines are turbocharged 4-cylinder diesels. The 2.2-litre makes 160 PS of max power with 385 Newton meters of max torque, whereas the 3.2-litre, well, that's got an enormous 200 PS of max power and 470 Newton meters of max torque, which is just about 30 Newton meters less than what the Trailblazer offers. The Endeavour nonetheless feels much quicker, much easier, simply because that maximum torque, the 470 or for that matter even the 385 Newton meters of max torque, they come in much earlier than in the Trailblazer. While Chevrolet uses a balancer shaft in the engine to control harshness, Ford has another trick up its sleeve. They use a sound cancelling, a noise cancelling wave emitted from the speakers, and that effectively cancels out the engine clatter. So essentially you get a much quieter cabin than the Trailblazer. The Endeavour is just so much quieter, it almost feels like you are driving a petrol rather than diesel. The Endeavour's diesel engine is a very responsive engine. Instantly responds to whatever throttle inputs you have to put. Even the transmission, well, that's a fairly quick transmission. However, the Endeavour, even in the 3.2-litre spec, which we've also tested, well, it isn't as quick as the Trailblazer. 0 to 100 in the 3.2 was achieved in 11.1 seconds. While that's quicker than most other SUVs, it still cannot beat the Trailblazer's 9.8 seconds. The 2.2-litre Endeavour is even slower. It takes about 13 seconds to 100 kilometers per hour. The ride quality of the Endeavour, well, it's impressive like you wouldn't believe it. You'd actually for a moment think that this was a monocoque. Instead, the Endeavour still retains its body and frame chassis, but it's got independent suspension at the front with double wishbones at the rear, a similar layout to what the Trailblazer offers, and yet the ride quality is so plush, it's so compliant, it's hard to believe that the Trailblazer is just so far behind where ride quality is concerned. The debate between Ford's Endeavour and the Chevrolet Trailblazer, well, it's a very short one and it ends with the Ford Endeavour. If you're looking for a full-size SUV, 7-seater SUV that has higher levels of refinement, comfort, luxury, efficiency, design, style, ride quality, drivability, well, then your attentions must be focused on the Endeavour. Agreed, the Chevrolet Trailblazer does offer, well, superior space, and of course it's got significantly better performance, but for everything else the Endeavour ticks all the boxes. We have a clear winner in this comparison test and the Ford Endeavour is it.